Jonathan Franzen is that rare type of writer who enjoys critical acclaim and wins literary prizes while also selling books by the millions. After publishing a widely read essay about the challenges of being a novelist in the television age, he released The Corrections in 2001, his breakout work which seemed to capture the zeitgeist of an increasingly anxious America.
I'd like to introduce you to one of the greatest science fiction authors of our time, Ronald Chevalier.
I'm assuming you love to write fantasy fiction, except the character names in your stories are suffering. Need thou not be afraid? We can add Onius, Ainus, or Anus to just about anything, and it becomes magical.
So when are you gonna let me read one of your stories?
I've let my mom read a few, but they've just made her cry. You can read this. Bronco and Vinaya began their assault on the yeast factory.
Bronco.
I am your soldier.
I'll cut to the chase. Unless you can give us something worth taking to print, we're just gonna have to let you go.
Bronco. I can do better. Broncanus. Forgive me. Cyclops there.
Cyclops there. Cyclops there. Turrets. Oh my holy crap. Surveillance does. I hate those.
It's fantastic. And I've ordered your proofs for print.
Oh my gosh, is that the new Chevalier book?
You stole my story. Awesome. All you did was change the character names and turn Bronco into a tranny. This is ridiculous. Cookie! How about you come down here and fight me like a man?
Seize him. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's plagiarism. I'm completely distressed. I can't even concentrate on my audiobook narration.
Now, your novel, as we said, is called Purity. It's both the name of the main character and a key theme of the book. Why the focus on purity?
Well, when I began writing the book, I was looking at the rise of this kind of radical idealism in many parts of the world. The word purity kept popping up, whether it was in among the jihadists or among the conservative ideologues in this country, an obsession with ideological purity, but you also were seeing it on the left in terms of a kind of purification of language on college campuses. And even in Silicon Valley, there's this notion of just kind of, we'll have complete transparency, we'll have complete dominance by the internet. There's this, everybody is like saying it's got to be all of one thing, and that makes me nervous as a novelist.
I think it makes everybody nervous, Jonathan.
Yeah, exactly. So no, whenever you have ideological purity, you have bodies in the ground. It's not a good thing.
Yeah. So the character Purity is known to her friends and family as Pip. And she makes the connection herself in the book to great expectations on her. Is the book a conscious nod to Charles Dickens?
No, not really. You know, the name Pip came to me, and then I thought, oh, hey, well, that's kind of interesting because there was this famous Dickens character. Dickens was somebody who I was very involved with in my 20s, not so much for the last several decades. But it did seem to set up an interesting contrast between the kinds of stories that were available in the 19th century, where you have a big secret and no one can ever find it out, and it's only through some coincidence that you find it out, or somebody decides to tell it. Now, if you have a secret, you know, you can't do a story like that anymore because no secret is safe in the internet age.
Yeah, well, Dickens also, if I can sort of extend this a little further, gave us a snapshot of the great issues of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, poverty, wealth inequality, and strangely, in the 21st century, some of those issues are still echoing through your book. So you've got the digital revolution rather than the Industrial Revolution, but you've still got poverty and inequality, which is a key theme in the book. Are you sort of taking your hat off to Dickens and his social criticism to some degree?
Well, you know, here we are doing television, and television is what put an end to the Dickens novel, really, basically. He was being socially instructive in a way that television now is. You want to know the news, you want to know what life is like for other people, you turn on the TV. The novelist doesn't have to do that anymore. So in a way, we can't go back. That's over. That was a wonderful period in the 19th century with the social novel. I'm now more interested in how these larger social developments impinge on individuals and individuals in relation to each other. So yeah, I pay attention to the big social picture, but I don't expect anyone's reading my book because they want to know what it's like to be Pip living in a squatter house with anarchists who hate the American banks. They can find all that out. It's really, what does that mean for the character that she's there? And what are these other people like in particular? So I think the novelist's job has gotten a little different, even if we still pay attention to the social picture.
Well, sure. I mean, it is feeding off the zeitgeist, though, particularly with the hated bogey men, the banks. And you've included a very rapacious sort of post-GFC financial institution, the Bank of Relentless Pursuit. Do you think banks are kind of symptomatic of a deeper malaise in America?
I'm doing this interview from downtown New York City, and I lived in New York more or less continuously for 25 years. And sometime in the last 10 years, as one of the small magazines here lamented, the entire city turned into a giant bank. And I was so in love with the city for so long. I'm now living in Santa Cruz, California. When I come back here, my heart doesn't suddenly start beating faster the way it did for so long. It would always be like, New York, I'm back in New York. And now it's like, I'm back in a bank. And and nobody, all the people who I used to know in Manhattan, they all live in Brooklyn or they've moved to other cities entirely because it's basically, New York is this giant symbol of income inequality, and yes, a lot of it does have to do with the concentration of wealth in the banks and Wall Street generally.
It's seeped into the book. It's seeped even into the metaphors you use. You talk about Pip's relationship with her mother as being tainted by moral hazard, and Pip herself is like a bank too big to fail in her mother's economy. Is the actual philosophy of banks starting to infect American family life?
Well, yes, if you could call that a family, it's really just Pip and her mom. And of course, the premise of the book is her mom won't tell her who their father is. That is our big secret. But yeah, sure. I mean, she's just out of college. She's got this enormous student debt that she has no way of paying. So she has to live in a squatter house just to save money. And she's thinking, she really gives her mother a terrible time. She's hard on her mother. She's sarcastic to her mother. She can say whatever she wants because she's all her mother has. And that actually is sort of the situation we found ourselves in 2008, 2009 here. The banks could say whatever they wanted. We weren't going to fire them because the entire economy was going to collapse.
Now, on the other side of the coin, completely from the banks, one of your key characters is a sort of almost Julian Assange-like celebrity hacker, internet hacker, Andreas Wolf. Through him, we get a really dark picture of the internet. Every compulsion, certainly his own viewing of digital images of sex, smacked of death in its short-circuiting of the brain. What are you getting at here? What do you think, through him anyway, the internet is actually doing?
Well, as a public figure, I've said some mean things about parts of the internet, particularly social media, particularly Twitter. I have my own political suspicion of it as a kind of hyperdrive form of capitalism. I don't really think it's great that our entire lives are being ruled by a market economy, and that's what happens when you let the internet into every aspect of your life. But I kind of check those at the door when I sit down as a novelist. In fact, I'm more inclined to push against my own convictions in a novel. What you really want to do when you're writing fiction is pay attention to how technology functions for the individual. And it's interesting, you hear all these crazy people in Silicon Valley saying, "Oh, this is such a everyone's been liberated by this wonderful new technology," and as a novelist, you are just paying attention to how people actually use it, and the way people behave with their devices looks more like they're enslaved to them. And then I think about my own life, and I think it was so wonderfully liberating to get email. I was free of the phone, and now what do? I spend 2 hours every day chained to my email.
You and everybody else,
So,
Jonathan.
yeah, I know, but so there are these ironies available that really don't have anything to do with policy. They don't have to do with a dystopian or utopian vision of the future. It's just like what you can do in a novel, if it's a big novel, is you can have fun with the way people really are with these things rather than the way they're supposed to be. And of course, Andreas, who came to public fame as a dissident in East Germany, or as a so-called self-styled dissident in East Germany, he now is living in this Assange-like bubble where his entire existence, he doesn't really have an existence personally. The existence is all in hyperspace. And it was really fun to pay attention to take an extreme case of somebody who is completely defined by his internet image and talk about what that feels like, what it feels like to have your identity sucked out of you and put up into a million web pages and a billion references and all of this data online. It's all on servers.
And an incredibly sexist world that he inhabits as well, where the young women sort of exist as kind of handmaidens to him, and all the people doing the hacking and, let's say, the hard computer work are all men. Was Julian Assange a kind of model in that regard as well?
You know, Assange and Andreas are rather different characters, because Assange was a real hacker. Andreas is more of a charismatic leader, and he buys his hacking talent. But it is noticeable, you know, Silicon Valley keeps putting itself forward as a model of a better world, and then you look at the boards, you look at the management structure, you look at the salary structure of all these companies, and you realize, you know, this wonderful new world seems to be much more sexist than a bank. You know, there are fewer people at the vice president level who are women out in Stanford than there are, you know, at Citibank. It's so, yeah, again, paying attention to those little ironies like that, and it is ironic that the sexual or the gender division in that world is so extreme.
Jonathan, where do your characters come from? Are they pure products of your imagination? Are they amalgams of people you know or have read about or come to understand in some other way?
It seems you might not like the answer, but they are both at the same time, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
They have to be, yeah, they have to be worked and worked and worked until I start dreaming about them. So they become these kind of gigantic symbolic invented objects. And yet, in order to get that process started, I have to be thinking of specifics. And in the case of Andreas Wolff, I've been thinking of him in certain ways since I was in Berlin in 1981, 82. I was reading about some dissidents there. I knew people who knew them. But it goes back even further. There was this kid I went to in high school. His name was Andreas. And I had a little bit of a boy crush on him. Never saw him again. So he was a perfect person to think of, to start to have as that little seed for the character to develop around in that oyster-like way. Somebody who I'd really, really been intensely attracted to, not necessarily physically, but he was a very compelling guy. And then, because I didn't know him, I could completely imagine him however I needed to. But there had to be that little personal connection, something I could picture to start with. Yeah,
I've heard you describe this process as one of coming to love the characters that you create, and you'd have a hard time caring for them and caring about the pages you write about them if you didn't actually love them. Do you really develop kind of strong feelings for the characters that you're creating out of your own imagination?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look forward to going into work every morning, and if I have to look forward to spending time with characters who I really dig. I mean, I really enjoy them. I love them, and I don't think it's possible for a reader to love a character if the writer also doesn't love the character. At the same time, I don't want it to be easy. Like, I'm not, and in fact, in real life, I don't love the person who everything is all right with. I tend to love the person who has a difficult life, who has somehow achieved lovability in spite of being neurotic or anxious or, unreliable or whatever. It's that's where the fun is for me as a novelist. Can we take this character like Andreas Wolff? He's a murderer. He kills somebody early in the book, and then he hides the secret. I mean, I don't make any secret of that. You'll find that out pretty early in the book. So you kind of set that bar, like, how am I going to find a way to love this guy? And then that gives me something to do in the when I come into work in the morning. That's the problem. How do I do this?
Now, when you were younger, you were strongly influenced by the German philosophers. You also studied Freud and Lacan. Lacan, I mean. Did this
sort of.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, did this kind of reading, did it influence the way you examined the psychology and the philosophy, I guess, of characters when you're imagining what's going on in their heads? Did it influence you as a writer?
Well, I was very taken with a certain kind of theory for a while, but, Freud himself, I don't think Freud would have been Freud if he hadn't read Dostoevsky. And what do we find in Dostoevsky? You find in Dostoevsky characters who think they're doing one thing, but in fact, there's something wholly different going on. Dostoevsky really, in literature, was the first great example of somebody, of a writer who understood that we're not always in control rationally of what we're doing, that there are other forces in us that are equally strong or stronger. And so, Freud kind of gave a theoretical framework for that, and it's antiquated at this point, and also was incredibly sexist in many regards. So it's not Freud himself, but it was what Freud was drawing on. You see this notion of sometimes we defeat ourselves even though we are trying not to defeat ourselves. All these, the kind of the existence of the irrational and the divided in the human being. We like to think of ourselves as, oh yeah, we're just these little rational units going about, we want this, we get this, we work hard to achieve this goal, but there's so often all this other stuff going on where we're defeating ourselves, or we're pursuing something we don't know why we're pursuing it. We may, in fact, be pursuing the opposite of what we think we're pursuing. That level of understanding of psychology, yeah, you can find it in Freud, but you can also find it in what Freud himself was looking at, which was literature, which is where people began to discover that.
We've got about a minute to go, so a final thought, Jonathan. Can you tell us about this idea of yours, that writing is deliberate dreaming?
Well, yes, and it comes off exactly what I was just saying, which is if you read Kafka, you have the sense that you're having this dream. And it is in the dream that Freud himself was fascinated with the dream, because that's our little portal into what's really going on in the world you can't see inside yourself. And you want to try to create that experience of everything is intensely significant, but you have to actually be in control of it, because the novelist has some responsibility to make the book mean something. So that's where the deliberate part of the dreaming comes in.
Jonathan, we're going to look forward enormously to you coming out to Australia. We'll all get to see you up close and listen to you in more detail over a longer period of time. Great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to coming to a country where you can say Lacan on national TV.
有我所不乐意的，在天堂里，我不愿意去。有我所不乐意的，在地狱里，我不愿意去。有我所不乐意的，在你们的世界里，我不愿意去。
那你为什么还眷恋这个世界？
我只愿蓬勃生活在此时此刻，无所谓去哪，无所谓见谁。那些我将要去的地方，都是我从未谋面的故乡。那些我将要见的人，都会成为我的朋友。
你知道我别无所求，我只想有个安静的环境写写东西。以前是以前，不是现在。你就没有好好听过我说一次？
我不能选择怎么生，怎么死，但我能决定怎么爱，怎么活。 这是我要的自由，我的黄金时代。